Hi darlings, Mimi G here of MimiGstyle.com, and I'm super excited to be able to provide you with step-by-step video tutorials to accompany my patterns with simplicity. Today we're going to be working on 1283 View A. Let's get started. Let's cover some of the basic tools you're going to need. You will of course need pattern 1283. It comes in size 6 through 14 or 16 to 24. You're also going to need 2 pairs of scissors, one for your fabric and one for your paper. You're going to need some pins, a seam ripper is handy, some pattern weights, although I use just large washers from my local home improvement store. You're also going to need a coordinating thread and zipper. The pattern is designed for knit, so you can use any two-way stretch knit, a ponte, or a double knit will work just fine. Today I'm going to be using this beautiful eggplant double knit fabric. For View A, you will need to cut out 4 pattern pieces. You're going to cut out the front, which is pattern piece number 1. You're going to cut out the back, which is pattern piece number 2. We are going to cut out our collar, which is pattern piece number 3. And finally, our sleeve, which is pattern piece number 4. Make sure you cut these out in the size that best matches your body measurements. And I always suggest going with the finished measurements on the printed tissue. Before we cut out our pattern pieces, we're going to lay out our fabric with right sides facing each other. The right side is the fabric side that people will see, and it should be folded in half lengthwise with selvage edges meeting. When laying your pattern pieces on top of your fabric, you want to make sure that you're following the grain lines. So the lines that you see on your tissue paper should be running parallel to your selvage edge. And so you want to make sure that when you lay your pattern piece that the grain line is going in the same direction as your selvage edge. Now this is a crop top, and so if you would like to add an inch or 2 to the length of it, you can simply do so at the hem. You can measure out up to 2 inches, make a new marking line. You can join those lines. And this will become your new cutting line, and now you have added 2 inches. If you've added 2 inches to the front of your top, you should add 2 inches to the back pattern piece as well. Now that all your pattern pieces are laid out, make sure that your grain lines are going in the direction they are supposed to, and then simply cut around your pattern pieces. It's really important that you transfer all of your dots and notches that are on your pattern pieces. Each dot or notch corresponds to another pattern piece, and it helps you along in the construction to make sure that you're adjoining your pieces correctly. So you want to make sure to transfer all of the dots that you see, and the easiest way for me to do it is I make a little snip into my notches, and then for my dots I simply use a pin and I put it in whatever size I've cut. And once I have it through all layers, I simply lift my tissue paper and I mark where my pin is. That way when I remove my pin, I've marked my dot on both sides. And then I will do that for all of my dots. Now that we have all of our cut pieces and you have transferred all of your notches and all of your dots, we are ready to sew. We're going to start by using pattern piece number 1, which is our front, and we're going to sew together our center front seam. I have already switched my needle to a ballpoint needle, and I have changed my stitching to a stretch stitch. If your machine does not have a stretch stitch, you can use a very narrow zigzag, and that will avoid any popping of stitches and will help your stitches grow with your fabric. So what you want to do is you want to start to pin, so always pin at your notches first. And then pin at the top and at the bottom. And we're going to start sewing from the bottom up using a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And we're going to be using our zigzag stitch or stretch stitch the entire time we're sewing. Back stitch. once we have sewn our center front seam, you can choose to leave your edges unfinished and then simply press your seams open, or you can press your seams and then finish off your edge with a serger or zigzag stitch. I have pressed my seam and I have also now finished my seam allowance with my serger. Now that we've finished our front piece, as far as sewing our center front and finishing our seam allowance, we're going to attach our back pieces at the shoulders. So grab both of your back pieces and we're going to attach one shoulder of the back to a shoulder of the front. So match your notches on the shoulder and pin. And make sure it's nice and flushed in the front and pin. And then grab your other back and also pin at the other shoulder. And we're going to be using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Do the other shoulder the same way. Now that you have finished your shoulder seam, you want to give it a good press and finish your seam allowance. I finished mine with my serger. And now we're going to attach our collar. So get pattern piece number 3. And you should have a couple of notches and some dot markings on your collar. And what you're going to do is you're going to fold this in half with the wrong sides facing, meaning the wrong side of your fabric is on the inside and the right side that people are going to see is on the outside. And you're going to start pinning your dots to your shoulder and your notches to the notches on the collar. So let's start with our dots. And I'm going to pin my first dot to my first shoulder seam. And then I'm going to pin my notch on my collar to the notch on my neckline. And I'm going to align my center front seam to that little center front slit on my collar. And then continue on to do the other shoulder. And that last notch. And now as we're sewing, you're going to see that the neckline is a little bigger than our collar. So as we're sewing, we're just going to stretch a bit so that it fits. So starting with the collar facing up and using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, you're going to start to sew and you're going to stretch slightly until both the collar and the neckline are aligned. Now I have serged the edge of my collar. If you don't have a serger, you want to clip your collar down. So you want to remove about a 1/4 inch of seam allowance if you didn't trim it already with your serger. And then you want to give this a good press. So go to your ironing table and press your collar and then create a basting stitch on the end, which I'm going to do now. You're just going to use a very long stitch. It's just to hold it in place. that on both ends of the collar. And give this a good press, and we're going to attach our invisible zipper. Okay, we're going to insert the invisible zipper a little differently than explained or shown in the pattern instructions. In the pattern instructions, they have you attach it with an invisible zipper, which is a great method. I use it. If you have an invisible zipper foot, that's wonderful. You can use that method. If you don't have an invisible zipper foot, this is the way that I prefer to insert my zippers. So I'm going to show you that method using just a standard zipper foot. So what you're going to do is we're going to pin at the notch for the center back. And I'm going to pin towards the bottom. And then I'm going to match the seams of my collar. And I'm going to pin and then I'm going to pin at the top. And what we're going to do is we're going to sew using a regular length stitch from the bottom up until we get to our notch. We're going to back stitch, and then using a basting stitch, one that we can easily remove later, we're going to sew from our notch all the way up to the top of our collar. Now change to your basting stitch and sew till we get to the top. As you can see, we went from a regular stitch to a longer basting stitch. Okay, so now that we have our stitching done, I have pressed this open to make it easier to work with. And what you're going to do is you're going to take your zipper and you're going to place it so that the zipper pull is past our collar, because we don't want this in the way. And you want the center of your zipper to be in the right aligned with the center of your seam. And so you're going to pin only on one seam allowance. We're only working on one side. And then pin again. And then maybe pin one more time towards the bottom. And now starting at the top, using your zipper foot, and you want your needle to be on your zipper tape, and we're going to sew a basting stitch all the way down just to secure it. And then we're going to flip it over, and on working on the other seam allowance, we're going to do the same thing, just a basting stitch to secure this in place. Now once we have it basted, we're going to remove the basting stitches from the center of our seam. So get your seam ripper, and right in the center we're going to remove those basting stitches that we created, and we're going to open that up. And just to make sure you don't go past it, on the inside you can look and see where you switched from a regular stitch to a basting stitch and pin through all layers. So when you get to the other side, you know that when you hit that little pin, you need to stop. Now we're going to open our zipper, remove that pin, and you're going to pull the zipper as far down as it will go. Now working on the wrong side. Now our intention is to sew as close to the zipper teeth as we can using our regular zipper foot. So move your needle to as far left as it will go, and you're going to sew and pull the teeth open. So you're going to sew and then pull the teeth open. Don't sew through your teeth, just as close as you can to your zipper teeth. So now when you turn it around, you'll see that we've sewn pretty close to that the zipper teeth. And so we're going to do the same thing on the other side, starting from the bottom, working our way up. Close your zipper. And now you have a finished invisible zipper. Now we're going to do our sleeve. I'm going to show you how to put your sleeve in using the flat method. In the instructions you'll see directions to do this using a set and sleeve, which will work just fine. But I prefer to attach my knit sometimes using a flat method in the event that I want to make an easy fitting adjustment for my tops. So if you do want to do that, then I'm going to show you a quick and easy way to attach your sleeve so that you can make one fitting adjustment at the end of it if you need to. And so what you're going to do is we're going to be working with our notches and our shoulder seams, and we have those dots and notches on our flat seam. So we're going to start with the center dot on your sleeve, and we're going to pin that to the shoulder seam. And we're pinning with right sides facing, meaning the right side of the fabric is facing each other. And then I'm going to pin my dot to my dot. And then my notch, and then at the end of the sleeve. And then on the other side I will do the same thing. So I'm going to match my dot to my dot. I'm going to align my notches. So there's 2 notches for the back, there was only 1 notch for the front. And then I'm going to pin at the end. And so starting with one end, you're going to sew using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And as you get to each pin, you're going to stretch a little bit as you're sewing. As you can see here, there's a little bit of give, so we're literally just going to pull. Okay, now we have attached our sleeve cap, right? So if you look at it from the right side, you can see we have a nice smooth cap sleeve. And now here's the thing, if you want to try this on before making any final stitching, and you want to make sure that it fits the way that you want, what you're going to do is you're going to sew from the bottom of the sleeve all the way through to under the arm, where the underarm seam is, and then all the way down the side of our top. And you're going to use a basting stitch, which is easily removable. You can try it on, see if you like it, if you need to take in more or let it out a bit. And then once you have figured out how much you're taking in or letting out, you can sew over your basting stitch a final stitch using a regular 2.5 length. Okay, I have sewn both of my sleeves and I finished the edges, my seam allowances, and so now we're going to pin. So I'm going to start at the underarm seam. I'm going to pin there first, and then I'm going to pin at the sleeve, so over where the bottom of my sleeve, and then maybe in the middle of the sleeve. And then I'm going to align my notches on the sides of my top. And then I'm going to pin right at the bottom. And starting at the bottom of our top, we're going to sew up to the underarm seam, and then we're going to continue down the arm. Now we have sewn our sleeve and the sides of our top in one continuous seam. Now you can go ahead and finish this off and then sew the other side the same exact way. I have serged and cleaned up my seam allowances nicely on both sides, and I went ahead and I serged the hem of my sleeve and my top. And so we're going to turn over 5/8 of an inch, and we're going to sew close to the edge. Finish both hems on your sleeve the same way, and then you can do the same thing for the bottom. You can turn under 5/8 of an inch and sew close to the edge all the way around. I have finished my sleeve hem and I have finished the hem of our top. And so now the only thing that's left to do is to finish our zipper. And so what you're going to do is just open it a little bit, and you're going to fold the top in and over, and then we're going to slip stitch this closed. So get a little needle and thread, and just grabbing a couple threads on each side, we're going to just slip stitch it closed. a couple of knots to secure. Cut your threads. And then do the same thing to the other side and you're all done. That's all there is to it. I hope you've enjoyed sewing along with me, and I'll see you guys again very soon. Peace.